As high school seniors receive their college acceptance letters, a new survey looks at the issues facing new higher ed students.
Being able to successfully navigate the cost of college.
Today on The Best of Our Knowledge, we'll hear about the hopes and worries of new college students and their families. We'll also take another look at so-called no-excuse charter schools and spend an academic minute learning economics from the boss. I'm Bob Barrett, and this is The Best of Our Knowledge. Springtime means the weather's getting warmer, the birds start singing a bit louder, and high school seniors around the U.S. are getting their college acceptance or non-acceptance letters. Each year around this time, the Princeton Review releases its survey of incoming college students' hopes and fears. Here to talk about this year's edition of the survey is Rob Franick, the editor-in-chief of the Princeton Review. I asked Rob what this survey actually measures.
Well, the survey is called College Hopes and Worries, and it measures the hopes and stressors, fears, and worries, generally speaking, of college-bound students and their families. And this is the 20th year that we've been doing it, Bob. So, I mean, just from a longitudinal perspective, it is just so revealing.
How has it changed over the years?
As you and your listeners probably are not going to be surprised, stress levels around college admission and financial aid and filling out financial aid applications, they're at a fever pitch now. But it's stark in looking at the comparison. In 2003, the percentages were right around 52% of students and their parents concerned about college admission, financial aid, and so on. But now the stress level is at a solid 74% of students and parents are either reporting very high or high levels of stress around the process.
Well, you also have a little survey on dream colleges, and you do both the students and the parents, and they pretty much look alike.
They do. You're right. And this has been in part and parcel of the survey since it began in 2003. But for the student list, and the question is, what would be your dream colleges if cost and academic admission acceptance itself were not issues? And for the student list, number one is Stanford University, of course, the Ivy of the West. Number two, Harvard College, and then three, MIT. But when you look at their parents, they said Stanford is one, Princeton is two, and Harvard is three. And when I look at this and I joke around with my own students, I'm like, oh gosh, what a thoughtfully conceived list. I mean, we know that, the 49,000 students who applied to Stanford, the 4.2% of whom, were accepted, are superlative. But there's 3,000 plus schools in the country. Let us do all of ourselves a service and widen the lens, because there's so many schools that could be such great fits for students. And that's one of the reasons that we want to report on this stuff and then appeal to students and parents to have a wider view.
Well, you talked about stress levels being up. What are they saying are the toughest part of trying to get into college?
Number one, and this has been now 8 years running consistently on this survey, and again, we've been doing it for 20 years. Not too surprising, but again, good to see it in clear quantitative data, is specifically around assuming too much debt to pay for college. And this is uniformly feared by both students as well as their parents and guardians and extended families. So we know that when colleges and universities hear this, we understand that their messaging will likely continue to change and to continue to address those fears head on, bring up the uncomfortable conversation of money and cost of college, but doing it, as you and I have discussed in the past, Bob, doing it earlier on in the college process so that you don't wait until you receive your admission letters, in March or early April to start talking about money.
It's interesting because you list the biggest hope as financial aid. So they just, they're holding hands right there at the top.
You're right. It's all under that same sort of umbrella of financial aid and being able to successfully navigate the cost of college and the financial aid process. And I tell also, again, tell all my students, whether you're taking the SAT or ACT, these are knowable and navigable exams. But same goes for the college admission process. It might feel stressful and intimidating because of money and other factors, but the truth is you can get through this, right? And you can do it well. You can do it with joy. I mean, you're not just matching, quantitative data to a particular school. Yes, there are quantitative metrics in the college admission process, but it is a human process as well. And as you and I have talked about in the past, that's where the loveliness of the college process comes in.
I love the discrepancy between the parents' estimates of the cost of college and the students' estimates of the cost of college.
Well, yeah, and I give a lot of lectures to students and parents, and I ask them to shout out from their seats, virtually or otherwise, what they think college is going to cost. And when they're uniformly in a big room, there are lots and lots of parents and students that are saying it's going to cost me $100,000 or more to attend college. But when we broke it up in the survey, parents are saying pretty solidly it's going to cost over $100,000. Students are saying it's going to cost under $100,000, but again, still causing fear and anxiety in the process as we move forward.
You've now got a few years of data on this. How has the pandemic changed the way students go about this and their choices?
Well, one of the things for the last 2 years during the pandemic has been students voting with their feet and parents voting with their feet, going to schools or considering schools early on that have just a low sticker cost or a lower sticker cost than other schools that they might have considered, pre-pandemic. So we understand, again, cost and financial aid, and that specter follows students in their choice of schools. But then, one of the I think the solace in the survey is that we had a solid percentage, just shy of 40% of students and parents saying, hey, it's not going to affect us at all. It's not going to affect our choice in schools at all. And therein lies, again, some solace for me, and I think many students and parents saying, we're going to get through this pandemic. We're going to have this wide view around admission, and we're going to be able to find schools that are going to be the best fit for us academically and otherwise.
How does a school's environmental record fit into this? Is it something that they take into account?
It is solidly. And we have a green rating at the Princeton Review, just talking about the sustainability practices that schools have. And it's funny enough, students and their parents are saying this must be a factor in us deciding fit. And what I love is that it's not just, nice to say, oh, hey, we have a recycling program on campus or whatever, but commitment to the environment extends to food service. It certainly extends to the academic side of campus. And we're reminded by faculty and career services that in the next 10 years or more, the jobs that students are going to be getting, upon graduation are going to be green jobs, have a sustainability element in them. So students are going to be better qualified, I think, Bob, than you and I would ever be qualified because they're going to have this undergraduate experience talking about sustainability early on.
What are students saying that they see as the main benefit of going through all this and getting a degree?
They're seeing it as that idea of, yes, college is of value to me, but it is of value to me because I am going to get, after I have my college degree in hand, a better job and going to have a higher income over my professional lifetime. And I am heartened by that, but when I present that to some counselors, even some families saying, gosh, isn't that directly opposite of the liberal arts ideal? And I remind students and parents that let's look at the data here. And students and their parents are saying, listen, we can hold those two ideals in our heads at the same time. That wonderful broad education that we know is going to happen through the liberal arts curriculum, and still finding a job upon graduation that is going to be a career of substance, or moving on to a graduate school or professional school of substance after you graduate. But the truth is, can you move on and be have that wonderful experience, move into a professional experience that you're proud of and that you feel financially secure? And I think the answer is yes. And students and parents are saying the same thing.
So you spoke about stress. Is this the time of year when the stress hits its peak, when they keep checking that mailbox and that inbox for the acceptance letters?
Absolutely. We are right in the sweet spot. Basically in the month of March, students that, are seniors in high school will have applied to college already, and they're receiving their admission letters back. The majority of those letters will come sometime in the month of March. Now, then students have until May 1st, which is called National Decision deadline or National Decision Day. There's all sorts of nomenclature, but that's when students have to decide which of the 8 schools that they apply to, the 7 that accepted them, which schools are they actually going to say, this is where I'm going to come or going to attend come late August or early September of this year. So that's a date that makes students stressed and their parents, but it also stresses schools out, right? Because schools are going to understand what their freshman class is going to look like on, basically May 2nd after they decide, after students and parents decide where they're going to attend.
That's Rob Franick, the editor-in-chief of the Princeton Review. You can find a link to the survey on the Best of Our Knowledge page at wamc.org. Still to come, strict discipline and no excuses. We'll talk about a unique set of charter schools next on the Best of Our Knowledge. Got any questions or comments about the Best of Our Knowledge? Send them in. Our email address is knowledge@wamc.org. And if you'd like to listen to this or any past programs again, you can find them online at our flagship station's website. Just go to wamc.org and click on the programs link. And while you're there, subscribe to the Best of Our Knowledge's podcast or download the WAMC radio app to listen on demand anytime, any place. This is the Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Bob Barrett. Silent single-file lines, detention for putting a head on a desk, rules for how to dress, how to applaud, how to complete homework. Walk into some of the most acclaimed urban schools today and you will find similar recipes of behavior. Joanne Golan spent a year doing just that. In her book, Scripting the Moves, Culture and Control in a No-Excuse Charter School, Dr. Golan describes the good intentions and unintended consequences of these rigidly controlled schools. Joanne Golan is Assistant Professor of Public Policy and Education at the Peabody College of Vanderbilt University. We spoke last spring, and I asked her why she started this project.
Yeah, so I first heard about these no excuses schools when I heard about a practice they do that's called SLANT. If you know anything about these schools, you would see students, they kind of sit with their hands folded and they're tracking the teacher in the classroom. But this acronym SLANT stands for sit up, lean forward, ask questions, track the speaker, and nod for understanding. And I thought it was actually a clever way to teach middle class expectations for showing attention. So sociologists talk about schools as having this hidden curriculum. The hidden curriculum are these expectations that aren't made explicit to students, and thus students who don't know them may be at a disadvantage in schools. So I thought SLANT was a way to make explicit these expectations. I nod a lot when I'm listening to somebody, but no one ever told me that was what you were supposed to do. So that's what first got me interested in these schools. I was interested in whether they were teaching students what sociologists call cultural capital.
And define, just for everybody, what is a no-excuse school?
Yeah, so the term has been used to characterize this group of high-achieving urban charter schools like KIPP, Success Academy, Achievement First, Uncommon Schools, Yes Prep, the list goes on and on. And they share common practices. Among these are typically extended instructional time, so an extended school year, an extended school day, intensive teacher coaching, data-driven instruction. But most controversially and most distinctive is their highly structured disciplinary system.
And you won't find one of these schools in Beverly Hills, will you?
No, these are schools that serve almost exclusively low-income students, Black and Latinx students.
And talk about the disciplinary structure of the schools, because as you said, it's very strict.
It is very strict. So these schools typically have some kind of rewards and consequences system. What they do is they call this practice sweating the small stuff. So a typical urban school might pick its battles. It might suspend students for lighting a match in the hallway. These schools monitor and pick on every little kind of misbehavior. So they'll give infractions to students for things like putting a head on a desk or talking in the hallway or rolling your eyes at a teacher or not following a direction. So the school I was at, on average, students received one infraction every 3 days over the course of the school year.
What school did you monitor and how did you choose it?
Yeah, so for research, I can't actually say, the name of the school, but it was a school that explicitly said they followed a no excuses approach. It was an approach they had copied from other networks like those I had, spoken of. And I chose it because it showed success in raising student test scores. It was considered a good school. So I wanted to look at the model kind of at its best. And it was open to allowing a researcher in to just hang out with them over the course of a year and a half.
And you call, I mean, the name of the book is Scripting the Moves. What is scripting? You call it scripting success.
Yeah, I took this phrase from an interview transcript I read from a principal of another school. And she says, what we do is script the moves. We basically tell students and teachers exactly what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be doing it. And that really resonated with me when I was at this school. So we talked about student behavior. We're very prescriptive about what you can do, what you can say, where you can move. And it's the same thing with teachers. So this struck me, on new teacher orientation, they had, I don't know, a 10-page single-spaced script for, what teachers should say during orientation, where they should be positioned to monitor student behavior. So that was a common theme I saw in the school.
So innovation, not a big deal there?
I would say it can be difficult to innovate. The school said, if I asked them, are there practices, that you think are essential to your school model, practices you would change? And they said, if we're, doing 100 things, we probably need to do 99 to make this model work. They really felt it was a package deal. So they were reluctant to modify practices because it was something they had copied. It was something they thought worked. On the other hand, I would say these schools can be, reflective on their practices. And certainly in the past few years, we see some of these networks trying to make changes, particularly to their disciplinary practices.
When you started the project and started doing the research on this school, what did you see that surprised you?
One thing maybe was the stress level of the students. That's something maybe I should have anticipated, but even for students who weren't quote unquote behavioral problems, even students you would think were, the best behaved students, they actually also felt stress from this model because they felt so much pressure to perform and not make a mistake. So I write about one parent who actually kept her fifth grader home for 2 weeks because the girl just couldn't handle the pressure of being set up as a positive example for her classmates.
What about the teachers? How are the teachers reacting to this? You do say in the book that there's quite a bit of turnover in these schools.
That's right. In the school I was at, 50% of the teachers had actually left the previous year. And the school's motto for that year was making that school a better place to work. I characterize teachers into 4 groups. I call them conformers, adapters, imitators, and rejectors. And I think teachers did vary in response to the school scripts, depending on their own personality, their own classroom management styles, their own background. So we had some teachers who were naturals, and they felt very comfortable implementing, strict disciplinary practices. We had others who would adapt these practices. So they would do a silly slant instead of a regular slant, or they would make funny chants to soften the school's disciplinary practices. But then there were teachers who rejected them, and there were teachers who left just after a couple months of being in the school.
I was going to say, of those 4, which were the ones most likely to leave?
Definitely the rejectors. So they either disagreed fundamentally with the school's model, the school's ideology, or they didn't feel like they could implement the practices. I had teachers who said, it just does not feel like me. I feel like this is an out-of-body experience.
Did you come out of this year with a negative outlook on these schools?
I would say a critical perspective. At the point I was doing the research, I would say these schools were really held up as exemplars of charter success. They still are, but now people are beginning to recognize some of their drawbacks, some of the cost of these schools. But I hadn't gone into the research with a critical perspective. Like I said at the beginning, I went in interested in a sociological concept of cultural capital, and I really came out seeing the impact of these scripts on students and teachers.
It does seem like there is so much emphasis on discipline that teachers are almost part-time enforcers while they're trying to teach. Is that the way it looked to you?
Absolutely. I felt like a lot of the school day was spent on behavioral management, especially for novice teachers. So teachers whose classrooms weren't in order, then when they had these one-on-one supervisory sessions with their coach, most of that conversation was about discipline. How will you enforce the rules the school wants you to enforce? They were not about teaching or pedagogy.
How many of these schools exist around the country about?
So KIPP is the largest and first of these networks, and they serve about 100,000 students in 250 or so schools. And then there are maybe a dozen more. Most of them won't call themselves No Excuses schools, but they use very similar practices. They're all these urban charter schools.
When you talk about discipline, are you talking about suspensions, detentions? What are you talking about there?
Yeah, so this varies by network, but those are the most common punishments. So suspension, detention, and also these rewards and consequences. So they can be smaller things, like if you don't receive enough points, for behavior, you may not be able to participate in a field trip, or you may not be able to attend the school social, or you may not have the privilege of eating lunch with your friends. So there are smaller consequences like that. And then there are, of course, detentions.
One of the things you bring up in the book is that the main purpose these schools say is that they want to get these students into college. And they've been fairly successful at that, haven't they? But have they taught these students how to succeed in college?
Yeah, I think one really interesting finding that these networks themselves are thinking about is, well, we've gotten all our kids or most of our kids to the college door, but actually lots of these kids aren't making it through college. So the KIPP network found that only about a third of their students are graduating from college within 6 years. And I think there are many reasons. There are multiple reasons why students may not be graduating from college, especially low-income students. Many of them have to work. It could have to do with academic preparation, but these schools really thought it had to do with these social and behavioral skills. So these schools are so strict. Are you really teaching students how to be independent in college, right? College, you just have a lot more freedom to do things. You don't have this rewards and consequences system. So are you teaching students how to advocate for themselves, how to speak up in class, how to go to a teacher's office hours? Are you even giving them the right impression of college? So one of my favorite quotes from the book is this 8th grader, and she went to visit a college and she saw couches in the dormitories. And she thought, well, maybe in college you can actually talk a little bit because there's couches there. So what do they expect? You're just going to sit there and read a book? You must be able to talk a little bit. So she had gotten this impression from her own school that in college you couldn't talk at all, So I think these networks are starting to think about how do we make this transition from a very structured environment to a much less structured environment in college.
It almost seems like they get to college and all of a sudden they're off script.
That's a great way to put it. And I think in my book, it's right. Instead of giving students scripts, can we give them tools that they can use and adapt in different kinds of situations?
Are there examples of schools around the country that are doing this right, that just have a great success track record?
I think there are schools that are starting to shift their practices, individual schools within a network. For example, in the KIPP schools, I know the Bay Area KIPP schools have been looking at restorative justice disciplinary practices for a long time now. So I would say there are pockets of experimentation. And then, of course, there are charter schools that are very different from these schools, much more progressive schools that embrace project-based learning, they're very race conscious. So there's a wide spectrum of charter schools. But among these kinds, I would say, surely you could find a few trying to do different things.
In the book, you go a bit into the history of the charter movement, and it was supposed to be something that spurred innovation and experimentation. That doesn't seem to be the way these schools are going.
Yes, the charter movement started with this idea that we're going to give teachers and schools more autonomy to be innovative. And no, I think what's happened is you had these first schools like the KIPP schools starting this model, and it was successful. So then you have these other charter founders, charter networks copying the successful model. So what you see is replication instead of innovation. You basically find a script that works and you stick with it. And we also have a lot of foundations kind of in the 90s, early 2000s spreading the replication of this model because it seemed to be more effective than other models.
So if these schools were to evolve, and if they are evolving now, where is that originating? Is it the students, the teachers, the parents? Who's asking for change?
I think everybody is asking for change. I think we've seen protests by students. We've seen letters from teachers protesting these policies. And I think this is a moment for change. A lot of the networks this year have released public statements renouncing the no excuses philosophy, rethinking their disciplinary practices because of what people call the dual pandemics of systemic racism and COVID. So I think there certainly is a moment, and I think a lot of people are demanding change.
Again, the name of Dr. Joanne Golan's book is Scripting the Moves, Culture, and Control in a No Excuses Charter School. Seems like everyone who is born in the USA can learn a little economics from the boss. That's the topic of today's Academic Minute.
What can Bruce Springsteen teach us about economics? I'm Dr. Lynn Pascarella, president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities. And today on the Academic Minute, Leah Graydon Matthews, professor and chair of economics, listens in to find out.
Bruce Springsteen's music represents the struggles and hardships of chasing the American dream and giving voice to challenging emotions individuals may face with their economic circumstances. In the iconic first verse of The River, for instance, we encounter a narrator who is keenly aware of the limited economic opportunities available. I come from down in the valley, where mister when you're young, they bring you up to do like your daddy done. Here, our narrator is referring to a lack of economic mobility or the ability of children to earn more or do better than their parents, a hallmark of the American dream that has eroded over the last decades. Themes like these in Springsteen's music are the inspiration for Springsteenomics, economics through the songs of Bruce Springsteen, a course I co-created with my colleague, Dr. Melissa Mahoney. This course introduces basic economic concepts such as income immobility, class identity, unemployment, economic opportunity, social justice, and the economic trauma of everyday experience via deep listening to songs like The River, followed by reflections and responses. Pedagogically, this method provides students with opportunity to sit with the material before responding. It also humanizes economic themes through music, making these typically quantitative concepts more qualitative or narrative and thus easier to relate to and understand. Our approach is not only impactful, as documented in our analysis, but practical. Listening to a song, then closely reading the lyrics, and listening again allows students to engage with challenging content in an approachable manner. Connecting with the song invites students to sit with and explore their emotional responses to music, and thus its economic content, which supports critical thinking and mindful engagement with the ever-changing and often challenging economic conditions that surround us.
That was Leah Graydon Matthews of the University of North Carolina, Asheville. You can find this, other segments, and more information about the professors at academicminute.org.
The Academic Minute is a production of WAMC, Northeast Public Radio, in partnership with the Association of American Colleges and Universities. That's all the time we have for this week's program. If you'd like to listen again, join us online at our flagship station's website. Go to WAMC.org and click on the programs link. And while you're there, subscribe to our podcast or any of the other WAMC or National Productions podcasts. And if you have any questions or comments about the program, send them in. Our email address is knowledge@WAMC.org. And you can find us on Twitter at TBOO_Knowledge. I'm Bob Barrett. Be sure to join us next time for another edition of The Best of Our Knowledge.
Bob Barrett is producer of The Best of Our Knowledge. Dr. Alan Chartock is executive producer. The Best of Our Knowledge is a production of WAMC Radio's National Productions, which is solely responsible for its content. Hear more at WAMC.org.